So what we are, so I'm going to talk about non-duality. So sometimes when I'm doing talks, I talk about non-duality, or I talk about balancing out the human on the human level. And I feel that often what has to happen before listening to non-duality, or before really hearing non-duality, you can hear it and listen at the same time, is a balancing out of the person. I know that's what had to happen in my case, is that I had to psychologically calm down. I had to understand myself better and not do so many negative thought cycles in order to hear it. I don't feel like there's an end though to working with the human, and I still work with the human, for me, myself, even after years of it, and listening and not listening and speaking and knowing non-duality and this energetic shift. I still work on the human level, on my conditioning and my genetics and my way of being, and I still strive to expand more and more the human personality. And through time I feel like it lines up more and more with the nature of reality. Like once you've heard non-duality, the person just keeps expanding and it becomes more in line. But on the human level, I'm certainly still updating the conditioning. I still can have some bizarre issues or ideas or thinking systems. They're not like they used to be. But now I'm going to talk about what you are. And what you are doesn't require you to recondition the human. Normally, the human needs to be reconditioned to an extent, but it actually doesn't require it. What you are is here all the time. And it's present even if the mind is in hell, is hateful, is a saint, a sinner, argues a lot, is really peaceful, is into non-duality or into Islam or Christianity or demonism, if that is something. It's political or not political, ethical or not ethical. What you are is always present. And that seems bizarre to the mind, because to the mind it's unthinkable that there's something here that the mind doesn't recognize. It's so intelligent that it can recognize and understand everything. And this is actually talking beyond the mind. What begins to happen when you're listening to a speaker is there's a slipping out of that mind and hearing about non-duality, not to. So something beyond what you think, which is incredible. I get so excited talking about this. I love it. Non-duality to me is the most beautiful subject there is. It's total freedom and it's total unconditioned love. It requires nothing. There's nothing you need to do to get to it because it is already present. So, what we're taught as children is that we're a name. So I was taught I was Lisa, and I had severe dyslexia, although that wasn't diagnosed until I was older. But I had severe dyslexia, and I struggled to identify as this name, Lisa. And I struggled to speak. And I struggled, it felt like I struggled to be human. So I remember kept being told to write my name, or there was a pressure to say this is my name. And I only vaguely remember it. And I remember having this feeling that I had to say that was my name, otherwise I wouldn't be human. I wouldn't be allowed in the human world to take on this name. So prior to me taking on this name, just like you, prior to your parents keep repeating you are a name, what are you? So prior to that, I didn't have a name, and I didn't really know the concept of myself and other. There was some sort of natural instinct that was coming up in the body that could recognize the difference between me and a wall. It didn't just keep walking into a wall. But there was something that was there prior to my name, prior to being in relationship with the world or with another human. And that which was there, the essence of me, didn't have a label of any kind. It just was. And the qualities of it were looking, consciousness, and this I am, presence. So the sense of presence and this empty, conscious looking. And I didn't know I had that because I didn't have the ability to think I was Lisa and I had something. I just was it. This is prior to me taking on my name. This alive, radical presence. And at that age, my memory wasn't working so well, so I couldn't really formulate who I was. I couldn't really formulate the memory. So often, prior to taking on our name, we can't remember much, so it feels quite blank. So everything was appearing, and there was a consciousness of it. So there was a recognition of everything. And there was this sense of presence, this I am presence. But it wasn't happening to someone. There was no one to hold on to it. And that presence is still here. That empty looking and that sense of alive presence is right here. I am, and there's this consciousness. It's always been throughout my life. Always. When I had my heart broken, when I was shouted at school for not completing my work, when I was bullied in the playground, when I enjoyed the most beautiful sunset, when I went on holiday with my family. When I went to university and I flew in an aeroplane and I got my first dog and I lived in Australia Thailand, India, France. I lived in all these different countries. There was still this I am presence and this consciousness. And no matter how much I cried or suffered or hated or laughed or loved or had joy, that consciousness and that I am presence was always there. After about the age of 5, when I started saying my name, I am Lisa, I'd stand up in class, although I most really wouldn't because I was insanely shy, so I'd be like, and then I would say my name. I began to forget about this conscious presence, this essence, which was so free and joyful, and I began to become Lisa. And Lisa began to pick up ideas from her society, from her education, from her friends, from parents, siblings, and she began to form a thought personality-based structure. I want to rest my legs. I've got nothing to rest my legs on. Ooh. I'll put them up. And in my particular conditioning, I had a natural, luckily, inclination towards being joyful and happy. So I had a natural inclination towards a joyfulness, an innocence and happiness, and to letting go of things. But my conditioning was very, very strong that I wasn't enough and that I'd done something wrong. Predominantly because of severe dyslexia and going to an education system 5 days a week for 8 hours where I failed at everything. Not just one subject, everything. Even subject I was good at, I failed at because I couldn't pass the test. So everything I failed at, and not just like failed was towards the bottom of the class, I was the bottom of the class. And dependent on your teachers, you got treated differently. Often you'd get shouted at, sent into the corner, sent out of the class, kept in at break times, shamed in front of the rest of the class. So I had a natural inclination towards joy, and that natural inclination got me lots of friends. So in that way I had positive conditioning, but I had very, very strong conditioning that I wasn't enough. And then also in my home life I had some difficult experiences as well, which also gave me the sensation that I wasn't enough, that my voice wasn't worthy to be heard, that love meant being invisible. And I'm sure lots of people have this conditioning. I'm just sort of saying all this, and it sounds really negative. So what happened then is that I began to create an identity that was a victim identity. So I began to form a victim personality, even though I had no awareness of that. And then there was this identification with that. I believed it was me. So in the dream of Lisa, so in the creation of Lisa, because it's a mental creation that started at about 4 or 5 years old for me, in that mental creation, I began to feel like I was not good enough. So when I interacted with anything, I always assumed that I'd done something wrong. It was so strong, you know, being dyslexic in this society, it was so strong that I'd done something wrong. So I began to form an identity based on that, which would predominantly be, in this society, a victim mentality. And then as you begin to display that mentality, that's how other people will treat you. So because I kind of am displaying that, I'm kind of asking for it, not purposely, I don't want to be it, but I'm also attracting people that like playing the perpetrator, or I'm attracting people that like playing my leader or my boss, or all these different things. I have no idea about this. But I was lucky that I had a predisposition towards joy. So that was my luckiness. So what began to happen is that I began to identify with these neural pathways and stories of Lisa, which society was telling me who I was. And as the years went on, I began to accumulate more and more victim story and prove to myself again and again that I wasn't worthy of love, I wasn't worthy of being heard, all these different dynamics, which I'm sure so many people can relate to, and feeling like I'd done something wrong. And I thought that's who I was. I'd forgotten about this innocence prior to the identity. And I got more and more sucked into this vacuum of thoughts. But then by the time I got to 20, and because I maybe had it quite intense, this conditioning, this negative conditioning, there was a lot of suffering in my body. Like, so other people maybe at that age still didn't have such strong suffering conditioning, you know, when they normally that level of conditioning is waiting for like the 40s when you have your like a midlife crisis. But I accumulated it quite young from all these different things that I spoke about, which in a way was a blessing, but I didn't know that at the time. So what it did was it began to make me question the nature of my experience, because how could experience lead to so much suffering? Like, not just in me, but in others, because I began to see it in others, because I felt this pain inside of me. I began to see it in the world, in the animals. I go into the supermarket and see all the dead animals, and when people argue the TV programs, it sort of kept validating my experience. And who speaks about suffering more than the Buddhists? So suffering and compassion than the Buddhists. So I began to get very interested in Buddhism. And this began to make me question this construct, or it didn't, at first, it wasn't even questioning it. It was becoming aware that I had a mental construct. I wasn't even aware of that. I didn't even really realize that my thoughts were projections onto the world. I just kind of thought that black was black and red was red, and someone was bad and somebody was good, and etc. So I began to question this whole identity. And this went on, and I got into non-duality, and I began to question it more. And then I began to hear non-duality. And even when I was in the Buddhist group, I began to feel this presence. When people talked about this I am presence or consciousness, I felt this love, this resonance, this remembering of being a child and looking at the world with wonder. And just being so open to possibility, like infinite possibility. So so I went more and more into it, and then began to have awakenings. And I'd already had awakenings even prior to getting into spirituality, but I began to have all these awakenings. And then eventually there was this shift. by this point, I'd done loads of work on my personality. I knew very well a lot of the constructs of Lisa. There were still constructs of the Lisa personality that were unconscious, but there was quite an in-depth understanding of what it was to be human, and my thinking, my emotions. And then there was this shift where I can't really describe it. It's like an energetic shift from being somebody that's name bound and limited and lives behind the eyes and inside the body and lives in time and is always thinking about yourself or what other people have done or said and all these types of things. There was a shift from being that to this presence, this empty presence, this silent, still presence that was watching itself. And this presence, I used to think, was inside my body and tied up with the personality structure, but the presence wasn't separate from anything that was experienced. And it was love. Absolute love. And mystery and freedom. This instant. And the personality structure kind of shifted from being the center of the show to being another element in the show. And it took me a long time to kind of, on the intellectual thinking level, to be able to kind of phrase this in words, because it doesn't come with a manual. But the personality structure still updates. Like, I can still sometimes have a tendency to think I'm wrong, like I've got something wrong or done something wrong, like that conditioning on the personality structure level. They assume that other people are right and that I don't know what's happening. To let other people take the lead, to not have great boundaries. And all these things, though, are getting updated and become more and more clear and understood better and sort of ironed out more. But they're still there, and I sometimes feel that, you'll always have an imprint of that old personality. Like, there's got to be a personality structure in this body. Like, there's always going to be certain neural pathways in this body, and you can update them to an extent. So we can always update them by learning, understanding, bringing to consciousness our dynamics, and then consciously choosing to choose a different dynamic. It can change it, but there's always this imprint of this personality. And that's taken me a long time to kind of come to a way to speak about that, because it's so tightly connected, the ironing out of the conditioning, like, and the waking up, because in one way, when you wake up, you do become more and more balanced on the human level, and you kind of fall in love with yourself more and more on the human level. And that kind of carries on after that shift, but that's hard to kind of talk about because they're so interconnected. But the most important part to talking about the human level is not expecting that you're going to be a perfect human. Like, not waiting to not have neurosis or fears or jealousies or guilts or embarrassment. Like, not waiting to become this perfect human God. Like if you think about it logically, it's like the ultimate ego delusion to wait to become this perfect walking God. And I've thought a lot, like as a speaker, why other speakers and teachers imply that you do become some walking God. And then there's a lot of teachers that don't imply that. They say that enlightenment is about the exception of all the imperfections in the human character. And so I've thought a lot about why there's such a big difference. And this is my latest up-to-date theory about why there's so many differences in the way. It could be that people like me and other speakers haven't got to this perfect human godlike state, and we are prematurely ejaculating, like prematurely talking. Like if we wait another decade or 2 decades, we'll get to this perfect godly human place where all conditioning is only positive. But that doesn't feel right to me. It could be that. I'm open to that, but it just doesn't feel right. Because when I look at Khaleesi, and I know Khaleesi's free, I know it. I know that she could never ever identify. So I know that she's the ultimate level of freedom. The ultimate. Because she can't identify, she could never identify. And I know you think that's debatable, but there is no doubt in my mind there. Khaleesi has all types of personality quirks. She displays guilt. She displays embarrassment. She displays fear. She displays joy. She displays excitement. She displays sadness. She displays sneakiness. She displays anger. She displays a lot of joy. I call her the external joy. And I've known her since she was a young puppy, and I've seen her become conditioned. So I know her and her natural way of being, and I've seen her become conditioned. And a lot of her actions now that I see and her behaviours, it's because I've had that joy of spending so much time with her. I can see how she's developed that in certain situations. So, if somebody raises a stick to her quickly, I know that reminds her of the gardener in Thailand, and she cowers in fear. Like when she's aggressive towards a dog, I know that's because when she first came into Europe, we had a bumpy landing trying to domesticate her. I didn't manage to secure us a home very easily with a garden, and so sometimes when we went out walking, I didn't have a garden, so she had lots of energy. She came across another dog with too much energy, and then she wasn't allowed to speak with that dog. She was pulled back by the lead and the collar, and this created a sense of agitation, so bit by bit she became more aggressive to other dogs on the lead. which is not that bad now because then we worked against it, but I saw all these conditionings, like these tendencies, these behaviors, like where she picked them up. When we lived with my mum's dog, she picked up from my mum's dog obsession with squirrels, chasing squirrels, and like looking up trees for squirrels. So she displays all qualities of perfection and imperfection, and I know she's totally free. I recognize that freedom because I have that freedom, that innocence, that empty looking, that alive presence. And like her, I have a bumpy personality. I have particular conditioning. And I strive to recondition it and grow and expand on the human level, whereas she can't really. I tried to help to recondition her. We work together at the reconditioning. So why is it then that some teachers claim this perfect state of enlightenment? And the reason why I think it is, and this is just a theory, I might not be correct about this, but this is my theory. So my theory is, and notice that this me most probably being so humble is dyslexic conditioning, just so you know. Like, if I hadn't had that conditioning, maybe I'd be more forthright. It makes you more like, well, I don't really know. So this is my theory. So we have different personality types. So my personality type is an introvert, and I'm also an empath character. And I mirror people. So when I come in contact with people, I instantly feel other people, and when I'm interacting with them, I'm very sensitive to the other person. So I have very strong empathy chemicals and mirror neurons in my brain. That doesn't make me a good person or better person. It's just a simple biological fact that's evolved and been necessary for our society. And then you get different personality types. And you've got a spectrum of different personality types. You've got personality types that have very little empathy. You have personality types that have medium amount of empathy. You have personality types that have very there's so many different ones, it's hard for me to point it out. You have personality types that have been taught that because they've had parents that had strong empathy, so they've been taught it. And then you've also got personality types that we call psychologically narcissistic personality types. And in the narcissistic personality types, you've got then different categories of personalities. You've got like the psychopath, the sociopath. And none of them are wrong, and none of them are actually any better or worse than being an empath, which is most probably the other extreme of the personality scale. So you've got narcissists on this side, and then the empath on this side, and then you've got all the in between. Now in our society, we tend to be more pro the empath and less pro the narcissistic, and we look at it as bad. But I think that's a very unbalanced view. I think that narcissist personality types have great qualities too. They tend to push society forward. They tend to be leaders. They can be great thinkers. But they've just got, so in our society they've got bad reputations, but they can be many great things because they're not held back by feelings and sensations of empathy, and they're not so confused by feeling other people's feelings and being sensitive to others and looking after the group, it means they can focus more on directing the group and more on doing things. And in a way, if you look at the group of people as like one individual, it's like different qualities of an individual. And you've got part of the personality which doesn't have such strong empathy, so they can focus on achieving goals, getting. And then you've got the other moral conscience of the group that's very concerned about the whole group and how people feel. And actually having those two sides of the spectrum in the group and all the people in the middle is actually a really good thing. It's not bad. But what we know is that people that have more the narcissistic personality, which isn't a bad thing, they have less empathy. They report no feelings of guilt, no feelings of shame. Some, though, they're not sure though, but some do have that very deep down. But some just don't have those types of feelings. They're just not wired to have those types of feelings. And from what I can understand, and from being around some balanced narcissists, not out of balance narcissists, and not psychopaths and sociopaths, but some balanced one, is that they tend not to feel these complicated feelings of empathy, compassion, guilt, shame. And by not feeling that, it means they're less focused on how the people they're interacting with feel, because they can't feel it and they can't imagine that another person feels it. So if we then look at the speaking of enlightenment, the speaking of enlightenment is predominantly going to be spoken by the narcissistic personality type, because that's going to fit in with the leader, with the one that pushes itself forward, and not the empathy type. And it will have some, so it will have some in the middle and some empathy types, but the majority will be of that narcissistic personality type. And the narcissistic personality type, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, and I'm not saying cannot be totally free, it can be totally free, but that narcissistic personality type, of course, is going to say that they have perfect feelings. Of course. They might acknowledge some imperfect feelings, but it's unlikely. They're going to only be focused on the more positive. And they naturally won't be feeling guilt or empathy. And they will be reporting back, and their mind will be fixating on their positive sides. And even if they have negative sides, they'll most probably say that's because they were helping someone else, because that's a narcissistic personality type. They'll say it's because of someone else. They were helping someone else, they were clearing somebody else's energy. They only felt that because it was relevant for the group. So what they'll report back is very positive feelings. Now, in one way, that's really good, because when talking about enlightenment, that's a good thing to do that. It, not eventually, but it's also a good thing because when people often begin to get into this subject, they need to have this daydream that they're going to be godlike in order to be motivated to keep listening. And then the more they get into this subject, the more they begin to accept themselves. So this is my theory as to why we have all these teachings or teachers that say that. And it's not that they're lying in any way, it's just they're wired differently. And I think it's important to talk about, because eventually you've got to love yourself for every freaking quirk that you have, just the way you are. Your tears, your sadness, your neurosis, your anger, just the way you are, totally vulnerable and naked, not perfect. That's beautiful. That's not a negative thing, it's really beautiful and compassionate. And see what that does in you. Like, see what I say does in you. Does it make you feel disappointed because you want to be this perfect person? You want to get rid of bits of yourself? And you can strive to update the conditioning. I always strive to be a better person, to expand, to grow, to be better in every area. Well, sometimes cleaning the house was not my, but I'm striving, I do strive, I have it on my targets to be tidier. I'm not super messy actually, I actually like cleanness and I like being tidy. It's just I don't like doing it so much. But I strive for that. We strive for it. And this big messy blob that's here isn't mine. That's Khaleesi's. That's her toy basket. That's her hippo's butt there. This is a hippo. You see there's the hippo's pink dress and pink booties. And that's its grey arse. I'm just now currently poking it in the arse. And then we got her rope there. That messy bucket's not mine. Okay, well that's a very, very long introduction. Pardon me. I strive not to pass gas on live streams, but it sometimes occurs. Because guess what? I'm not perfect. Oh my God, it's so beautiful.